So I wanted to talk about I mean, like your writing's incredible. I think that everybody that was reading it was okay, so this is my favorite. I already sent this to you, but to review. The complexity of this American celebration lay between two worlds. One of thankfulness we are still here, and another to mourn the millions of our people taken and everything with them. That is so poignant and just it's very beautiful. So that is the complexity of the holiday that we're working with right now, is that it is not the story that we have been told as children of everybody just gathering around. And honestly, until I had done some research and you had mentioned it, I didn't realize anything about even the how people were dressing in our like quintessential Thanksgiving story, right? Not being accurate. And so we actually, for homeschool, we use this book that I got on Amazon, and it has,
Yeah.
yeah, it has like all the tribes, and it's not like, I mean, it's like a page per tribe usually, but it's nice that when we're going through a different state, we can go find it on the map, figure out what tribe was there, figure out where they started and where they are now, because that's very different for most of them, and talk through the different contributions that they gave to America. And so that's a big part of how we homeschool, because it's not teaching history from like a single facet. You'll lose like a lot in in the meantime. So during this time right now, especially with the election that just happened, I feel like that was two things. One, I feel like there are a lot of Indigenous artists that are online right now that are like shaking things up, which is like so
A
cool.
plethora, multitudes right now. It's awesome.
And I think it's bringing back to the forefront, like we are still here, like our culture is still alive and well and beautiful. And I think that's a great challenge to kind of like the narrative that we got growing up, that this was a people and then they are no more. And then also the something else comment that was made during the election that was like, okay, but yeah, no, that's not how this works. You guys have been fighting so hard for such basic rights. The citizenship in 1924, that's so fascinating. We came and we took it all, and then we said, you can't even be a part of the thing that we did on your land. So what does it look like for you as you are speaking openly about this stuff, not just with me, but in other facets? What are kind of your hopes that you see for Indigenous communities, I guess, everywhere, but you specifically are working with Indigenous communities in America?
Uh, One of the things that we consistently uh, fight for is just to be seen as what we are: sovereign nations. We are our own nations. We answer straight to the president. We don't answer to state level government.
Right.
And that is something that is grossly remiss from history books. And so kids growing up from the time of they're in kindergarten till whenever they exit school are not taught any of this.
Mm-hmm.
We are citizens just like everyone else, and we don't have these rights. In fact, it's sometimes a shock, I think, that people realize that we are sovereign nations,
Mm-hmm.
and that we go, when we want to speak about issues, we go straight to the president.
Yeah.
And within that, for our reservations, it's really important to also understand that we have treaty rights, and our treaty rights are supreme law, because of our sovereignty. And that is also something that I think that is a pretty big surprise to a large majority of the population. And the reason why that's very important is that, for instance, eminent domain, and resource extraction on reservation, on tribal lands, is absolutely illegal, by whether it's ordered by the President of the United States or military officials, no matter who orders those things on tribal lands, especially without the consultation of tribal leaders themselves, which is often the case.
Right.
Uh, they go unreprimanded. And then we are called, the indigenous people who speak out about that and condemn it. We are not realized in a historical sense of it actually being law.
Right.
That it's actually, that it is actually.
Yeah, it's not law as long as you don't have a valuable resource there, which is kind of what it feels like is, okay, yeah, we'll respect that, but oh wait, you have this thing that we want, or we want to put something here, and then all of a sudden I feel like messaging is like, oh, they're being dramatic, like what's the big deal? So we talk a lot about like the weight of ancestral lands and how it's not like I want my house here and you want my house here. It's like not that simple. But it is interesting how we justify taking of something that, like, I mean, there's so much that has gone into developing these treaties, and I mean, most of the tribes aren't even where they were originally. So we already moved you off of where you were for thousands of years, and then we said now you can't even be there. So it is a shame, and I don't think that enough attention is paid to your greater role in society. So one thing we talk about in homeschool a lot too is how strong the veteran population is in Native American communities, which is so mind-blowing to me that like a country would come and invade and do all of these horrible things, and still there's so many people willing to raise their right hand and serve in the military, and just their level of dedication. We talk about patriotism and we have a certain face of what patriotism looks like, but to me that's just that's an incredible circle of really not having the same rights and respect, but still saying we're in this together. And I wish that would happen on the other side. Like other people would say, yes, we're in this together for you also. And that doesn't necessarily happen. So.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because Indigenous people not only volunteered but were called to assist with World War I before we were even citizens.
Yes.
So that's something that a lot of people and before we were allowed to vote.
Yeah.
That's something that a lot of people don't realize as well. There's also a difference. I mean, there are a lot of military families in tribal nations, and for me, my question about, as an Indigenous person, joining a government military that was founded on supremacist system. Yep. And is still supremacist. I often wonder at times myself, why would we choose to go to another country and essentially protect rich people's natural resource extractions?
Yes.
Government, our government's natural resources. When those people, those brown and black people, have never done anything to our Indigenous nations.
Yeah.
So I often question that.
Yeah.
Granted, everyone has their very own individual reason why they join the military. If they're Indigenous, why they do it. And often it is just a matter of deep pride. And of course, they want to serve their country, and whatever that means to them is very personal. And I wouldn't confront it. But just my question in general is, I think I think that Indigenous people maybe should stop to question, why am I joining this military that is supported by a supremacist system that is going to a brown or black country, often eradicating many of their people?
Yeah.
Why would we participate in that?
Yeah.
And I think that gets on a slippery slope. But that's
Yeah.
just something. Um, when people champion Indigenous veterans, I think they should also champion that question as well.
No, that's
Too.
that's a great question, because this is another important aspect of this is Indigenous communities aren't just in North America. We may be more familiar with that, but it's not what is real life, right? Um, so that was a big thing when I went down to Mexico a few years ago, and Indigenos was like this, you can see how people are dressing differently. And I was like, I hadn't had it in my face that much when I'd been traveling internationally. Because, like you go the places that everybody goes. But I stayed with a friend and I got to see more of that. And so I think it's important to remember there's people that start wherever the land is. And then usually other people have arrived later to all
Yes.
the places.
Yeah.
I want to close by reading this paragraph you wrote, and then if you have any more thoughts. You said, during my travels, I have met so many different Indigenous people, and my impression is always this. As stewards, teachers, and students of our cultures and our homelands, Indigenous people are bestowed with thousands of years of wisdom of the land, water, and sentience. Out of selfless love and care, our elders pass on languages, stories, medicine, food, ways, prayer, and our sense of humor. In turn, we try our best, individually, to learn as much as we can for not only the present, but future generations. To me, that it was very eloquent in how much of the culture that we have taken over time, and the resiliency of Indigenous communities to try to hold on to that as much as they have been able to. And I think that a lot of times we lump everybody, like, we're not talking about a whole book of people, right? Like, we're talking about one page in our heads. Everybody has the same
Yeah.
culture. They live in the same way. Like, it's all TPs. We have one feather in our hair. Like, it's just very simplistic. And I think when you learn more about the diversity of the different tribes, it gives you more appreciation of how difficult it has been to hold on to cultures with so much against them.
Yeah. It. I think that goes back to, like, kind of your first observation was how tribes, how we are trying to maintain and keep sustainable all of our cultural practices and traditions. And um, there are so many revitalization uh, programs, and on an individual level, all the way up to macro level
Mm-hmm.
groups uh, by Indigenous people everywhere. And that, I think it's really fascinating, and I'm so grateful for it, because you have a lot of people, a lot of Indigenous people who are now teaching other Indigenous people
Mm-hmm.
about what makes medicines. In If you go out for a walk, what is this, and what is this medicine, and how can you utilize it? By the way, do you speak Taratsa? If not, here's our language program, and we have elders that are teaching this. Or storytelling. Storytelling is
Mm-hmm.
our history book, and drumming, drumming, dancing, um, all of these different ways that people don't necessarily consider prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Those are prayer methods of prayer for us. We pray in so many diverse ways, and I think those are the ways that that we're trying to come back full circle and keep and maintain what has always been a part of us.
Yeah, it's
So
more than maintaining a hobby. Like, if I were to play the drums or dance. It would be a hobby, something that I was learning on the side. But for many Indigenous communities, it's like so central to how they operate and how they interact with the earth, which is very, it makes it harder, I think, as an outsider. Not that it shouldn't, but looking in, and I think it's easy for people to trivialize, oh, that's not that big of a deal if you don't have this or that. And another thing I was thinking about when I was teaching my kids yesterday, when the Puritans came originally, this idea of savageness and not having, like, we have to come and rescue you from yourselves, because the complex systems that were set in place for how communities were run look different than ours. And so we didn't say, oh, how do you guys do this? We said, oh, clearly you're wrong. We got to fix this. And so I think there's a lot to learn from listening more to other people's perspective. I think it's really cool that we have such diverse perspectives on how we see the world. But if you don't see that as cool and you just see that as weird, then we don't get to learn from each other.
Right. You see it as savage.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. I think we could talk probably a lot about about this, but thank you so much for asking, being curious and asking, and I really appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, I think it's going to give people pause as we're a little bit more critical of history these days, which I think is a good way to be headed.
It really is. Go out of your comfort zone and dare to think, wow, maybe we weren't right.
Yeah. Yes.
Maybe we could learn something from
I support that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. We will talk again soon, I know.
Yes. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.